Alright, I'm going to do some playing around today with a constant and a progressive depth gauge. The reason I want to do this is previously I tried using a chain that had been worn back, and I tried both gauges and I didn't see the difference that I thought I would. And it starts to make me wonder if what I'm seeing was unique or if it was because of a design characteristic of that specific chain, or if I am using these gauges in a different way to other people. I have a digital angle gauge. I've never checked this before. I've sharpened chain for probably over 20 years now. I have sharpened a lot of chain and I have never once cared enough about this to have a look. But I've got some spare time, we've got these spare links, so might as well give it a try. The link in the middle has been filed back to the witness marks. The chain itself is Oregon at 75 EXL. And I'm just going to try a few different things here and see what sort of results I actually get. The first question I want to answer with one of these constant depth gauges is, can it account for uneven length teeth? Basically, can one be short, the others be long? As you can see, yes it can. I'll show a picture of that. All I have done to achieve that is place the gauge on top, kept the pressure on top of where the cutter is for that tooth, and filed. So yeah, it can deal with unequal ones. There's a whole host of other problems that come with uneven cutters of this degree. I'm not going to go into that here. Alright, first step, let's just work out what the attack angle on this is. I'm not even sure if this is really a relevant angle to check. I might go into that later. So I've got the digital angle finder zeroed on the vise, and then I'm just going to move the chain back and pin it in the vise so it keeps it all flat and out of the way while we do this. Alright, hopefully that shows up in the video. This tooth that's had the depth gauge taken down with the constant gauge is right at 3 degrees. The new ones are about 4.8 on this chain. Okay, so we can adjust this cutter with a constant gauge. We're not getting a very good attack angle. It's not like new. Again, I'm not sure how important attack angle actually is in all of this, because I think there's a few other issues that come into play, but it's what we're dealing with. If you look at a lot of chain manuals, they'll tell you when you lower the depth gauge to reshape the front. Most of these constant depth, progressive depth gauge tools will go on about a 10-degree angle. Most manufacturers will recommend that 10-degree downward slope on the front of the depth gauge. This one has worked out about that because of the height of the cutters behind it. But putting the digital angle gauge on there, or anything flat, starts to show us another issue. It's not sitting on the part of the depth gauge that's really important, which is just this very little end piece. If you have a look on new chains, a lot of them are different. This one has quite a slope and a little flat section. Some of them come to a very fine point. As this tooth rocks back, when it hits wood and rocks back, what actually happens is the front edge of this depth gauge hits the wood and it stops the cutter from being able to get it. So I'm wondering if the difference I saw when I tried a progressive gauge and a constant depth gauge, or the lack of difference, is due to the way that I reshape the leading edge and the front of the depth gauge when I lower them. I was told in the beginning, and continued to do it, that every time you lower the depth gauge, that you should reshape the front. And I'm wondering if that's part of the problem that I saw, why I wasn't seeing that difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a black texter. I'm going to mark the entirety of the top of the flat section we've got on that depth gauge. I'm not going to make you guys watch me do this, but I'm going to reshape it. When I reshape it, I am going to leave the height of the very back section, the part that matters for this, I'm going to leave it the same. I'm not going to change it from its 0.65 mils that it's set up now. All I'm going to do is change the front and see if that gives me a different angle. Alright, so all I've done is reshape it, and we've gained ourselves a little bit of angle. Not enough, but a little. Hopefully it's visible on camera that the shape of that depth gauge now, the front of it, is much more in line with what it was originally. It's an important step of doing this. You see it a lot with people that have used a 2-in-1 file guide through the whole life of it. You end up with a big flat shelf straight across it. Doesn't hurt to get in there and just clear it up. Hasn't really improved the angle to a point that would be useful, but it is better. So what happens if we go to plan B? Alright, we're back here with plan B. Plan B, for anyone who's been around this stuff for a while, used to be relatively common. These constant depth gauges are sold in 2 sizes, and the general advice used to be you'd start with the correct one, which for this 3/8 chain is 0.65 or 25 thou. About the halfway point you'd swap over to the 404 one at 0.8. For guys running big saws with 404, what you used to do is you'd start with 0.8 and you'd swap to the 1.2mm gauge that was for 1/2 inch chain on the 090G. Not super commonly done these days, but we've got a bit of an improvement. We can probably do better, so I am going to just file it with one of these. Right, so how much improvement did I get from using the hard setting on a still progressive gauge? Long story short, fuck all. And that's the soft setting on the still progressive gauge. What's the conclusion at the end of this? I really don't know. I don't know if there's any point to any of this. I think the difference, or the reason I can't see a big difference with using a progressive style gauge, is the way that I've used the constant gauges in the past. The way I was taught to do it, the way that had worked for me for a long time, I continue to use them in that fashion, and I think that's why I can't see a big difference. I think it is very important to shape the front of the depth gauge, especially with styles like this, which is very common for most chains now. A lot of the older style chains ran a really short depth gauge. Have moved to these longer ones for a little bit of a safety reason with that longer ramped front, and also it generally has less vibration in the chain. So what am I really saying with this? Well, I'm not telling you to do anything, to be honest. I can make it work with both styles of gauge. I think this measurement's really not all that critical. Depth gauge height, yep, it's super important. Will I ever measure this again? Probably not. I've used Carlton filer plates for maybe 20 years. I've used these new steel ones, or I've used these steel ones for, I don't know, 5 years. Husky roller gauge, probably, I don't know, had one of them for at least 10 years. I'll use whatever I've got, honestly. I don't care. I can make this thing cut just by knowing what it needs to look like. It's up to you, basic user. It's really your decision. At the end of the day, use whatever you like. It's not going to matter. Focus on doing the job properly. You can use bad tools, bad equipment, and still make a perfectly good cutting chain. If you know what you're trying to do, check that you've actually done it, and just pay attention to what you're doing. You can use absolute crap and still make a perfectly fine result. It is more about the person's ability than the tools they are using.